You've got to love a Sunday, a feast day, where the scripture includes a multitude of camels shall cover you. I love that line. So this week, China's Chang'e 4 landed on the far side of the moon. It's incredible. The hope is that a radio telescope can be built on that side of the moon where none of the chatter from Earth, cell phones, radios, GPS, satellites, cards, Wi-Fi, radio, and all of that cannot be heard on that side of the moon. It's amazing that on this side, the side we see, all that chatter can be heard. So astronomers believe that the history of the very early solar system resides in the rocks on that far side of the moon. And one radio astronomer says this about what this research may yield. He says, "We would be able to listen to a distant echo of the Big Bang and see the universe in a state before the first ever stars formed." That gives me goosebumps. It's amazing. Astronomers in our midst, on the verge of answering some of life's biggest questions. So this morning we meet some different astronomers, or were they astrologers, some ancient seekers in our story from the Gospel of Matthew. And they are shrouded in mystery. First off, we don't really know how many of them there were, although inscrutably people decided that there were 3. We describe them as men, although one scholar says that if there were a group of these wise people gathered looking for spiritual answers, surely some of the female sibyls of the ancient world would also have been present. Herodotus, the historian, says that the Magi were a caste of priests who could interpret dreams. Others called them scholars, readers of the stars, wealthy seekers of the sacred. Whoever they were, their powers of divination and their holy quest led them to a star. And that star led them to a babe in a manger. What is interesting is that in the scriptures, any sort of astral cult is condemned, except here, in this one place in the Gospel of Matthew. These wise seekers, foreigners who did not know the God of Israel and who trusted reading the stars as a divination tool, they are embraced, even lauded, for their innate ability to recognize who this Christ child was. They are a reminder to us that truth comes to us from many, many places. So, they land in Jerusalem first and query King Herod, who then gets court politicians and religious figures involved. Herod, full of fear, recognized a threat in this newborn babe, and his consultations reinforce his fears. A king has been born in Bethlehem, so they say. And so he sends these wise folk the 9 miles from Jerusalem to Bethlehem in hopes that their time of homage there will become Herod's own GPS to this babe, who could then be murdered. These wise folk, kneeling under that glorious radiant star, offer gifts of great import: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. They were lavish gifts. Gold, the symbol of royalty; frankincense, a resin used as a ritual incense to offer praise to the divine; myrrh, another resin, rarer than frankincense, used to prepare the dead for burial. Not long after the gifts have been given, these wise folk glean through inner wisdom and deep dreams that they must not return to Herod's court. And so they go home by another way. Like most stories, this one, so full of hope and wonder, is also tinged with grief. Herod, foiled by the courage and clarity of the wise folk, orders the murder of all the newborns. And so the light of this radiant star also comes to reflect the blood of those known as the first martyrs of the church, the slaughter of the innocents. Joseph and Mary and the baby receive word of this imminent slaughter. They flee to Egypt. Undeterred by yet non-existent man-made walls, they seek refuge from the looming threat of death. Refugees welcomed in a neighboring land. Imagine, safe, free. And so the story goes. They soon cross back over the border, and the babe becomes a boy, and then a man. This story, which rarely falls on a Sunday, is one of my favorites. We've all grown up with it, haven't we? We sing about it. We have captured it in our nativity scenes. 3 wise men riding on camels. And we have watered it down. Before sentimentality, it is, in fact, an edgy story. Think about it. 3 foreign astrologers are the messengers of the arrival of the Christ child. I love that. What this tells me is that there are many places and people who are purveyors of the truth. The lens through which we interpret our story must always be spacious, wide, and generous. The gifts these wise folk give are extravagant. Gold. Gold makes me wonder, do I give my very best to God? Frankincense conjures beauty and wonder. And so I ask myself, do I take the time to see the sacred, the beautiful in all of life's things? And myrrh, a reminder that death is always in our midst. And life and living is not to be taken for granted. A line from a Mary Oliver poem comes to mind. What will you do with this one precious life? Jesus, Joseph, and Mary. Our story revolves around 3 people fleeing death threats, finding refuge in another land. The Holy Family, briefly refugees. They fled and they were safe, although warring tribes, national nationalistic disputes and the amassing of territory and riches were as much a part of their world as it is ours. Jesus, Joseph, and Mary found safe passage, they found sanctuary, but the fact that they had to flee and that they lived in a time of greedy empire building is a reminder to me of how little we humans have changed. That there was sanctuary, a place for them to hide and be safe, is a reminder of what we are still called to do, lo, some 2,000 years later, in the face of evil greed, unfettered fears, outlandish empire building, and roiling hatred. Whom are we being called to welcome, and how? It's a conversation all of our churches need to keep having. And finally, and the wise folk went home by another way. I love that. That's my favorite line in the whole story. So I grew up with a father who was a scientist, who was very linear in every way imaginable. And I, his youngest child, have always believed in the circuitousness of life. There are so many ways to find and to get and to return home. There's a wonderful line in a T.S. Eliot poem. It goes this way: "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all of our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." So beautiful. Our lives are full of twists and turns, aren't they? Yes? Bright stars and unexpected griefs. Yet throughout it all, we keep returning over and over and over again to this manger and this unbelievable birth. For in this act, God pitches a tent among us and never leaves us, ever, never leaves us. And it is in this knowing, this ultimate manifestation of God's great love, that everything else makes sense. And so, we too are called to be wise folk. Seekers as well as resting in what we have found. Following the star, yet always inviting others to find the star and follow too. Wayfarers who always welcome other wayfarers, no matter where they come from. And finally, resting at the place where we began, deep in the knowledge that there is only one place, our life in God, that truly, truly satisfies. This is the walk of Epiphany. Amen.